Are we expecting anybody else?
You mean like board members?
Yes.
That'd be great,
Greg said that you might.
It is 6 p.m. and I call to order the Town of Trophy Club Economic Development Corporation meeting. Do we have any public comments?
No, ma'am.
Regular items. Number 1, consider approval of the June 26, 2025 Economic Development Corporation meeting minutes.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
A second?
Second. All in favor? Motion carries. Regular item number 2, consider approval of the small area plan for the Grove at Trophy Club.
Good evening, EDC Board. We have McAdams here to go over the final document with you. I'm going to hand it over to them. Let me click on here. Oops.
Okay.
Hold on. Okay. Give me 1 second.
Yeah. Okay. Got a few more years.
Here we go. Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, EDC Board. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Randy Rivera. I'm a planner with McAdams, and I think we've been in front of this group a couple of times since I guess the beginning of the year. But I wanted to kind of give a brief summary. This document is 82 pages. We're going to read each page. No, we won't. But we want to just hit the high notes, the high points here, and then open it up to questions that y'all may have, and show those different options. We talked at length about that in that joint work session with council. So we want to talk about those and then implementation. So the first draft of this area plan document was prepared in May, and it was given out for comments and feedback. And then we received that by the end of May. We sent that back through our graphics team, and they reformatted it, kind of reorganized it in a way, and addressing the comments and feedback that we got from the committee, from the EDC board, and others. And so tonight, this plan incorporates those changes. We still keep it as draft for the time being because it still hasn't been finalized, and there may be some minor tweaks or modifications that we make depending on some feedback that we get from you tonight. So the document is organized into these 6 different sections. And I wanted us to spend more time in section 4 and 5. That's really where the meat of the document is. We've talked about sections 2 and 3 a lot, the site characteristics and the market analysis. We've also done and summarized the community engagement with the open house meeting, the online survey, and the meeting with all the property owners. And then that first section is a kind of a quick snapshot of the executive summary of the entire document. So we encourage everyone to read the whole document, but if you want to go back for a refresher after it's been a couple weeks, then that first section is a pretty good snapshot of those items. And it kind of just goes back over what's the small area plan, what's in it, and then the outcome of the Grove at TC, the development plan, and then the implementation and action plan. I am going to ask Marissa to walk us through the options for the development plan for for the Grove at TC, and then she'll pass it to Jason to talk about the implementation. And please feel free, I think it's okay to interact and have questions if you have any in the meantime.
So Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Brewer. I'm a planner with McAdams. As Randy has stated, y'all have seen some of this before. We've kind of talked about how we got to this point. So we're really just going to go through the meat of the plan itself. So just kind of going back a little bit just to recap, obviously we initiated a small area plan. This document is to guide development within this area. We do want to emphasize that this is guiding recommendations and suggestions on how this area could be developed over time, and looking at different things that need to be incorporated when someone comes to you and wants to submit a site application or look at developing a piece of land on this area. So with that, we went ahead and down. We went ahead and presented, obviously, the three options. So option 1, we presented option 2, and then we went into option 2B. So from that, we got feedback regarding, how infrastructure should be laid out, how many uses we need to look at, or what we should look at as far as laying out the land. Do we want to tie it to specific uses? Do we not? Do we want to incorporate more infrastructure changes, less infrastructure changes? Really looking at what we have currently and how this can be developed over a long period of time. This is obviously this will be a long plan. This isn't just a short-term come around a couple of years situation. So we really wanted to shoot for what the optimization of this area could look like, with the understanding that it's not all going to be done within 1 or 2 years. It could be a couple of 5 to 6 years, 10 years, those sorts of things, which we do talk about in the implementation charts, which we will get to. So based off the plan, we went ahead and initially we looked at the market study a little bit, and Jason will come and talk about that more in depth. But we did look at what currently is available in the area and how this area could be compared to that, but also looking at, with this plan that we've identified, how that will increase revenue, property tax, those sorts of things. So you can see on the right, just highlighting some of that information. I will say this plan was, or this information was pulled from a plan that was, again, fully built out, had the the area fully optimized instead of just a couple of uses. So those numbers are based off that, and you can read more about it in the market study, which will be in the appendix of the document. So touching on how we broke this plan down. So we had heard feedback regarding that we want options and flexibility, and we don't necessarily want to have something set in stone. So when we went back and revised the concept plan itself, that's what we've kind of broken it down to. We wanted to show a plan, but also provide options with that plan and break it out into certain steps. So for example, we went ahead and presented this development plan, but we also provided options within the development plan. So talking more about building configuration. So with this, there was also objectives identified within the goals that we had set. So we wanted to make sure that each option had addressed those goals and those objectives. So for example, the implementation of the development plan, one of the objectives was to implement appropriate vertical mixed use, infrastructure and area parking. So we tried to look at that. And so what you're looking at is the overall plan is the preferred plan, as far as this is what the ideal situation would be if someone wanted to come in and look at this, but then it also offers optionality to where if you don't want to put, or if you don't want to put a building in front of HG Splyco, or you couldn't get that agreement, those sorts of things, that you could just leave it simply just HG Splyco and not put anything in front of that. Also looking at having a bigger block structure. Instead of doing 3 buildings, you could do 1 building, just seeing how that would work with the land and what you could put there. But also providing not as many buildings if you don't want to provide as much parking. So it kind of dives deep into those. But the text itself provides guidance to an applicant. So not only are you saying, okay, you don't have to follow these layouts or this type of building, but you need to incorporate certain elements of this. So the text talks about creating a place for people to live, work, play. So we want to make sure that we're using the plan to incorporate those elements, but also making sure that you're providing different types of land use. So that was the primary goal of this specific development plan on this one. And then we went into the pedestrian plan. So we heard a lot of feedback from residents talking about the lack of connectivity. They wanted to be able to create a place where they could walk, but also feel safe. And so again, we pointed in the text that whoever comes in and would want to develop a site like this, we would ideally provide, shade trees, or making sure that your building placement incorporates that walkability and fosters a good sense of streetscapes and adding more trees and just enhancing some of that area a little bit more, but then you also can see where that can be done in the plan. So not only do we provide an option that can run the trail, we have the trail running behind the hotel back here, so that's an option, but then you also, if you choose to go with a different building structure or building configuration, block structure, you could also have the trail running down Plaza Drive and kind of feeding that trail through the two buildings. Same with the option to the right. You can have, if you choose to if you choose to realign the roadways of Trophywood Drive, you can add more of that streetscape, and then also creating more of a centric path weaving through the buildings if you were to enclose that. So we wanted to suggest ideas, but also even if you didn't want to look at the images and follow those images, you would also have the text that provides people with what should be included to help create these types of situations that you could look at. For the vehicular plan, this looked at a bunch of different options with the understanding, which is part of the implementation, that you would have to work through some agreements, but you would also have to work through financing and those sorts of things, but creating more of a connective type of street system. Obviously, we know the East Siders have a little bit less of they have one way in and out. So we wanted to make sure that we provided an option to where that would cater to them, but also providing, if they chose to eventually down the road swing it through in front of Town Hall, that you could see that option as well. You also have within that, you have your fire lanes showing how it would connect through once you have the buildings come in, how that would connect into other fire lanes, but then also with Plaza Drive connecting all the way through, and you can either turn down, ending at that block structure, or it could go straight through and then come out. So we looked at different ways of how this could be incorporated when you do want to come in and look at the different structures of the buildings and the plan itself. And then last, the open space. So open space was a key factor within this plan, and making sure that we could incorporate a prominent anchor, and we identified that as Town Hall. So we try to really incorporate the open space as much as we could in front of Town Hall, but also keeping it kind of around the restaurants and the retail areas to have that community gathering space that people were really looking for. It also shows different ways that you can have it run along the back side of things. So if people were walking, not only do you have that trail running along the north property line, but you could also have that open space there as well. So that way people could utilize that if they wanted to, just as a walking path or a place to go and sit and just relax. So then you also have the buildings, which played a part in how your open space would be laid out. So the primary objective here was to make sure that you were just having some kind of open space in front of Town Hall or along the back side of Town Hall, or in front of Town Hall. Sorry, I already said that, but just having that in there so that way people could come and gather. Jameson can also come and touch a little bit more on that, talking about the different ways we configure things. But I'm going to pass it off to Jason, and he's going to talk about the implementation stuff, and then we can come back up and go through anything deeper, or if you have any questions right now, I can also do that as well.
I don't have any questions, but I really do like all these options and descriptions of them. For me, I can follow this along much better than, the original draft had it.
Thank you.
So this worked.
How are you? Jason Claunch with Catalyst. We're a sub-consultant to McAdams, and our chief role was really to help assist the team and the staff of crafting the plan, but we're also involved in doing what I would consider the due diligence and underwriting this plan, making sure it's fundable, feasible, and constructible. And so one of the things we wanted to do is lay out kind of a clear path with McAdams, all right, well, what's the responsibility of the town? Essentially, I really consider, the town's role is setting the stage for private development. And so what's important in this phase is really, obviously, tonight and Monday is really kind of adopting the plan. This, you'll create a policy document and something to really lean into that both the residents and future developers could look to in terms of a guide. And I think McAdams has done a really good job of sort of crafting this a way that's flexible, but also establishing some things that would be non-negotiable. And so for me, even beginning this journey, and I think the important thing in any plan is that y'all have already gone through and created your strategic plan. And I think this plan has really done a good job of sort of adopting those guiding principles. And so for us, success is when EDC and council and staff are really communicating through a lens that, talks about, the importance of connectivity and open space and economic development, but also creating places for people. And so setting the stage and adopting this policy document is I think, critical. The second, probably most important thing, ultimately on the list at some point in time would be to adopt some sort of character-based standards or form-based code or regulations so that essentially you've got the tool to regulate this this plan so that it can become a reality. And that starts to sets the stage for the vision, and that'll set the stage for the can and cannot so that you really sort of tighten the framework. What's really unique about this process, and it's, it's beneficial, is a lot of these plans, the city doesn't have a role or participation in ownership, and you guys are in a unique position to do that. But when you balance the plan with a policy document with the regulations, and the city or the town does become the de facto master developer, and I think that's a very important position that enables you to sort of function is that y'all become the master developer. As part of that process, one of the recommendations you'll see in the action step is there may be a need or value in engaging kind of a program manager. Part of that role would be helping y'all construct a request for information or qualifications from different parties that could help activate the plan. I think that's an important component, but also function as a keeper of the flame and also help with outreach with targeted parties that are qualified, that are used to working with towns and understand public-private partnerships and have the scale and capacity to deliver the vision so that you're not starting from scratch. And so, beyond adopting that may be a role that would be beneficial. It's something that we've visited with the town on, and I think could, help track developer interest, help do the outreach and marketing, but also kind of understand the plan and the infrastructure and the capacity and really kind of push the limits on making sure that, future applications meet or exceed your expectations. The other, roles beyond that would really be looking at the infrastructure. Fortunately, not only do you have a great planning team, but you've got a great team that understands engineering. But obviously looking at the trails and sidewalks and the amount of detention and retention that would be required. And obviously, when you have a plan that is flexible, those needs may change based on whatever program ultimately gets adopted incrementally, but thinking through what's the infrastructure requirements and making sure that, you sort of balance your capital improvements annually, to address some of these items that you're sort of reserving up to address some of the chunkier things that can help make the plan a reality by delivering the framework. And that's, again, an important role of the town is being able to deliver the public infrastructure to match the private expectations when y'all do have interest. And And there's a balancing role. You don't want to get over your skis and get in front of making a ton of investments when you don't, have anticipation of the private development, but you want to be thinking about what is your role, what is the capacity required, and what is the infrastructure needs to match the framework that's been created. And then ultimately, looking at, special tools, if it's capital improvements or general funds, 380 agreements, or from a financing standpoint, looking at a TIF. There may be a role at some point, on some PID financing that the developer may, have an interest in, maybe funding some of the public improvements, through this. And so all of those things would be negotiated, but those are great tools to sort of understand, and at least having some napkin policies on when you would use those and when, when certain things might be applicable. The idea is to try to leverage both your assets, but leverage as much of the public investment to maximize the private investment. I mean, that's ultimate goal, and I know your vision is high and the expectations are high. And so, just making sure that you have adequate capacity to achieve the vision. And then ultimately, looking at other programs and grants, certainly when you're looking at trails and sidewalks and those things, just making sure that, you're keeping an eye out for those other programs out there and partners that may help you achieve some of those goals. A lot of these projects are small and incremental, but there may be opportunities to grab some match money or some coordination. And then speaking of coordination, some of the opportunities may be working with your neighboring towns and kind of cleaning up some of the parcel lines and some of the infrastructure. And so we've outlined some of those opportunities to start kind of leaning into when the climate is right and the timing is right, that you could partner with maybe your neighbor and some interlocals on some technical items that would help sort of clean up some of the infrastructure needs. One of the things we also would recommend when you get into the weeds is, and we worked with McAdams on this, is just looking at parking needs. This is a big project and there's a lot of parking needs, and I know open space was a primacy. So just thinking about, as you start to blend certain uses and different uses have day part requirements, there may be certain standards that you could adopt in a mixed use environment that would help you either relax parking to accommodate more program, but not necessarily, have primacy towards big parking lots. And we did integrate some opportunities for structured parking based on the height and size of some of the program. I think, parking garages may make sense, and those are great opportunities to partner with the developers that can help, achieve the higher density, but yet maintain open space, and get more verticality out of the project. So, any questions on implementation? Yes, sir.
So, thanks for the basing this and giving a good explanation of the implementation plan. Program manager, in your estimation, you've seen this in other towns, I assume?
Correct. Especially when you're on a project level. So, finding developers, coordinating some of the technical items, working out, maybe some of the things that don't fit the box, that would require variance, and navigating through that. Obviously understanding, incentives, and making sure that the justification is there. And then really, I think part of it's just, the most important thing to activate the plan is private interest. But what's even probably more healthier than that is having competition. And so having 2 or 3 folks that are interested in activating your vision will not only validate the plan, but it'll help you ratchet kind of the process and create the competition. So.
But before we get there, and that, I agree with you on all of those points, is this program manager, in your estimation, is it a full-time job?
No.
What do you see it as?
I think again, the role could be, a phasing process, looking at a catalyst project and help to jumpstart that. I don't know that it would be a full-time role, but it could be certainly something that y'all could work with a third party. And Brandon's certainly capable. I think at some degree, he would serve as that function, until there was additional resources that were needed. But yeah, I think it's an important person to have, is having a keeper of the flame and understanding the goals, and then really being able to work with a private party to help jumpstart projects.
Because there's some significant steps, in the plan here, working out memorandum of understanding with, certain parking issues and things like that are they're time-consuming.
Yeah.
And one thing that I'm concerned about is, number one, incremental cost, right? Because great to have a plan, but if we can't afford it, or if it's not given the right priority, then it doesn't make sense to have the plan because it stalls. And it's advancing the plan, keeping it moving forward, keeping it, front of mind.
And there's some things that you can do sort of incrementally. When we work with various communities in this capacity, and there's other folks that do this, but, one thing you can do is when you have a developer that's interested, one of the things that we've been successful is actually, when there's sort of a fish on the hook is setting up an escrow agreement and having the developer fund some of that pursuit cost and taking care of some of the town's resources as part of their pre-development expenses, so that town's not necessarily burdened with all of this on their own. So, I mean, that's the key, is you want to leverage your resources where they can maximize your value and maximize the outcome. And if there's some things that you can do to, say, shift risk, if you think about it from a financial standpoint, to the right third parties, that makes sense.
So I mean, you guys are basically a broker as well then. So you're going to be the broker on this deal.
Well, I mean, I guess we don't necessarily have to play that role. We are brokers, but my recommendation is finding the developers or working with the end users. There would be a brokerage capacity, but if you want to think about the term broker, yes, there's be a facilitator for the project or somebody that's brokering the entire plan, and yes.
No, yeah, I think it's needed
Yeah.
because in order to get,
Yeah.
you need a broker in order to get those businesses.
Correct.
And I was just
Correct.
clarifying
Yeah.
you guys' role
Yeah.
as a broker.
We are a broker, but essentially you need somebody to broker the whole vision. So, and I think city manager and staff can do a lot of that work, so.
Yeah, I think there's probably some combination there of staff. You have to have the staff level buy-in, engagement component of it, right? But the fine tuning of the details, right? The working through a lot of those, the busy work that, and the knowledge and the connections and things that they're just gonna make it go a lot faster on it, that there makes a lot of sense to look at outside support for helping to kind of make some of that project manager components really run. Even though you'll hold the base of that really at the city administration level, so.
We want one throat to choke.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We want to keep this thing, we want somebody who's accountable.
Correct, exactly.
this
And
plan.
ultimately, you're gonna need a staff person to do that component of it, right? And then working with that third party to help make sure everything is actually being accounted for.
No, that's, I completely agree with that. My whole thing was like this, because we're dealing with this in another project I'm doing, is just going and getting the businesses, right?
Correct.
That's the
Correct,
hardest part.
procurement,
about
yep,
this.
procurement for
Procurement of all
private
these
sector,
businesses,
private
the
procurement for
retail,
the developer, yes.
Bringing the right businesses,
Correct.
right? And so
Correct.
that's where I was
Yeah.
wondering your role, because that's going to be the most important part.
Correct.
It's a very difficult
Yeah.
job.
And I would say, and this is my own ethos, but I truly believe in this, and I went back to kind of the first page of this, is that I think, obviously from an economic development standpoint and, city management is having the ethos of these guiding principles. And so when you have projects that come that, and they're all going to be unique and different, and some are going to be different calibers and scale, but really using those guiding principles as the decision. Is it creating destination? Is it help us create the connectivity? Are we creating places for people? Is it creating the right economic impact? Is it meeting or exceeding our expectations? I think when y'all start talking through the guiding principles and evaluating the success or failure of certain decisions that you make, then really I think when everybody's on the same page with those, and I'm glad that y'all have done that work, those are places that we see really take advantage of market. The market's definitely here. We'll get into that in a second, but, there's definitely capacity for this. I mean, with the infrastructure and facility changes and how regional and accessible and visible this project is. It has all the kit of parts. The challenge is it's very limited geography, and there's, certain expectations, and so finding the right folks that can help you activate that vision are going to be very important.
But it's prime geography.
It's prime geography, for sure. And speaking of which, I'm going to go through a high level, but one of the things that we did in the very beginning to set the stage is, what is the market opportunity? You see businesses come and go, in places that your neighbor, you've seen people sort of execute at different scales, and I think one of the biggest questions is what is the art of the possible? Is this, feasible, fundable, and constructible? And so One of the things that we did early on is a trade area study, because your market is much bigger than just constrained within the city limits. And so in terms of, what I would consider, future utilities, certainly on the retail side is the primary trade area that we came up with, to understand today, people that are sort of shopping and eating within Trophy Club, what is the net of the market? And so that includes, really all of Roanoke, South Lake, parts of Keller. And then, again, this is kind of with a core market. We did find quite a bit of concentration from people that were even on the other side of the lake. So, kind of the edge of Flower Mound. And then, again, the greater area would be, Watauga and some of the other areas, Colleyville. So, and that's only logical. You've got a reasonable good base here, and there's certainly reason, but I would really see this site setting up for more destination uses and creating more gravity, and like HG, having sort of more regional appeal that could increase the size of that pie. But today, we've got, over 55,000, people within that market shed that's highly affluent. It has a lot of discretional income that could certainly, make sense of this location. The key is making sure that you've got the right infrastructure, and that as you design, certain buildings or certain opportunities, that the infrastructure is there. And then again, you've got to match that with the right private realm investment. McAdams did a good job talking about, streets and block structures and future amenities that need to be integrated into that. And some of those are going to, require some upfront, probably expenditures, and some of those you can kind of pay as you go and do performance-based investment. But the good news is, the market is certainly here. In a big takeaway, we found substantial capacity for both retail and restaurant. And I think, obviously from a ground plane standpoint, that'll be a big component, at least the stuff that's sort of what I would consider freeway facing, and even some of the internal streets. We looked at office because I think, there was sort of this friction between, higher density residential and, but you want to create a project to scale. And so probably the least controversial, issue to do that, or opportunity to do that would be office. And there is office opportunity. Obviously, that whole market's going through a cycle. But when you think about the choice population you have with the vast amount of talent that's already here and the amount of corporate presence here, thinking through, a few 100,000 square feet of office is not inconsequential, but I think it's certainly doable. And we did prove up that the capacity would be there for some office component. And that could certainly make sense, above retail or above a mixed-use building, or even possibly standalone. There's users out there now that would, probably look at this, that would build, 40,000 square feet in this market and be comfortable doing that. And the town, obviously you controlling real estate could help sponsor that. We did see that there is capacity for residential, so if there was an opportunity and the right product and somebody wanted to take advantage of that market, you may be able to squeeze some residential units on top of an office building or a mixed-use building in the right context. And again, all of that will get resolved, officially resolved probably through the regulating process, and that would have to be championed. But again, we see, substantial demand for some residential. And if you wanted to create scale, there's, and vibrancy, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of most people don't move to Trophy Club to live in an apartment. And so, it would have to be the right product and kind of sort of the right kit of parts probably for that to be digestible. But it does create ad valorem value, it creates scale, and it creates vibrancy, and it does help kind of the project work in some instances. If you're looking to do something, taller than 1, 2, 3 stories, that could be a potential use. Through that process, we did a market test. So we took kind of all the work that we did and the framework and the concept plan, and we went through several scenarios, kind of iterative scenarios on the different concept plans. And so the market test was exactly that. We took construction cost, at least at today's value, and market rents and absorption, and actually tested what the pro forma would look like kind of out of each one of those buckets, to see if there's enough yield to make the project work. Obviously, the retail had a substantial profitability to it. So based on what we're seeing, As you can imagine, office rents and office construction, there's, obviously kind of a narrowing of that. And so there's not a lot of meat on the bone for office. We wouldn't see that necessarily leading a project unless it was user-driven. If it's user-driven, then, corporate use could certainly make that work. And then obviously restaurants and residential obviously had, we're all accretive. The office was probably the lowest producing. That's just because we've got just such a compression of rents today, and construction costs haven't necessarily declined. But this gave us confidence that not only is there capacity there, but we, at least the work that McAdams did is good and it floats. And any of these categories could be mixed and matched, but at least the project floats today. And then in addition, we took that another step forward and we said, okay, well, if all of this happened, what's the net benefit to the town, and what's the upside of the town? And essentially, we looked at, on a 10-year runway that the town would receive about $9.7 million in total revenue. Some of the issues with this analysis is that, everything is sort of a, snapshot in time, and this project would probably get developed over a little bit longer horizon. This assumes that the project is built out to analyze this at this level. But again, the numbers may change incrementally, and that's why you would need to stage sort of your public investment with the private investment, because these ad valorem values may match sort of the amount of capacity and the sequence of development that may play out. But again, it does test out from a market standpoint, and it is accretive for the town. There is a substantial positive revenue that could be generated.
Could you go back a page, please? So playing the what-if game, retail 13 million, right? Office 106K. If we didn't have retail, because retail requires traffic, right? Typically foot traffic, correct?
I mean, eventually you got to get out of your car, yeah, and go shop, sure, yes.
But I mean, those numbers there, are they assumed people driving in, or are they assuming that there's residential, so we'll have foot traffic?
Yeah, so the residential obviously would create foot traffic. I think the real misnomer for high-density residential, and in this context, I think it makes sense because you're against a freeway and you get scale, and it could provide sound buffer. There's a million other reasons to integrate residential. In terms of it creating additional market demand, it's fairly incremental. I mean, if you think about the average household, 100,000 just for rounding purposes, you're going to get about 24,000 annual spend on retail goods and services. The rest of that covers household mortgages and all your other expenditures. That the actual amount of direct impact from one residential unit or even 150 would be nominal. So the goal would not be to add a ton of units to create more market demand, but it does create vibrancy, activity, scale, ad valorem, and it does create a place. And so it's hard to think about all the, Legacy West or all the places that you go and visit, that there's not a residential component, but I think, you could certainly limit the amount of residential units and accomplish your goals. But I wouldn't use that as a case to try to maximize the amount of residential units to create more market demand. The market demand's here. You don't need that scale for market demand. It really is creating the vibrancy in the destination, the place, and the livability, and all the things that go along with people living in places that are active.
Yeah, I'm just concerned when you say $9 million incremental revenue. I mean, I could hear
The gas.
staff, I could hear the mayor going, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that we can go through the numbers and say, if we don't have office.
We have the model. I mean, again, we have the model. We could pull office out. You don't lose any sales tax on office, but you lose some AV, and you could substitute that with other things. And we did this intentionally in buckets and silos. We tested each one so that, any applicant or any proposal that just has retail, we know that sort of works. And any office that was driven is probably going to be corporate driven or going to be based with somebody that, needs a floor or two, and somebody's willing to build some spec office and bet on the come. But, and then the dining and residential. So all of these sort of stand on their own legs. And while they are not completely mutually exclusive, they're all interdependent. None of these uses are relying on the other use to certainly work. And that's why we didn't just do a total and say this works. We wanted to split them out and make sure that each program works on their own legs. And I think it proves up that office is probably going to be the most challenging, and it's probably the best substitution for scale. You know, if you wanted to exclude the residential both is accretive in terms of creating ad valorem value and vibrancy and the other things, but, and it creates more value than office to a private sector. That's the perspective that you should leave with, but it's not, none of these are necessarily have to have. So, I mean, I would say that I couldn't imagine this plan without, you know, a substantial amount of retail and restaurants in it. That are places that you would want to go and frequent, and that others around the community from a regional standpoint would want to go and frequent, but the rest of the kit of parts, I think, could be flexible.
Great, thank you.
I just want to point out as well that the 9.7 million is a 10-year tax
Right.
period, right? I just want to make sure it's not an annual number, clarifying.
Although I like that hurdle. I mean,
Yeah, exactly, that would be fantastic.
yeah.
We'd all be asking, Brandon, what happened?
I know.
I can't wait till next year's performance review.
That was an annual, I'll develop the thing.
Well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to turn it back over to Marissa to let her finish up a couple other components. But anyway, this has been a pleasure. My staff lives here. We grew up in the area. I know how significant and important this project is to you guys, and we're really excited that we know that the opportunity's there. And I think you guys are putting the right kit of parts in place and the framework to enable that.
Thank you, Jason. Okay, so now we're going to scroll real fast to the back of the appendix. And we are going to touch on a scenario that we looked at regarding if we were to not do any garages. So this was I know there was some concern with garage costs and what that would look like and how that could play a part overall, and what could we do if we didn't have that in there. So we ran the scenario and we identified that there could be 4 potential buildings, with 2 of them being office and 2 of them being office, 2 of them being restaurant. This is assuming what currently is parked and what's there right now. So there are options to where you could extend parking near Town Hall a little bit, but this is based off just the parking ratios that the code currently requires, and also what that would support as far as square footage wise goes. So office parks at one of the higher numbers, about 300 plus 5. So that's why office is there, and that's why it's so large, because it doesn't consume as many parking spots as other uses like retail or restaurant. This plan also assumes that obviously you would push HG's parking back, and then that way you could create that separation between the residents and then the restaurants. But all of these would be 1-level stories. And so we just wanted to kind of point that out of this is what could be done if you were to just move forward without any structured parking needed. And there's different scenarios that you can run based off square footage and how much parking and those sorts of things, and what you're willing to work with as far as the parking agreements, and if you were to change your code. So there's different scenarios that play a part in how this could be laid out, but this is just a general idea. If the code wasn't to change, if you were allowed to move the parking back, but also use some of the parking, and it breaks it down kind of how that parking is being shown. I will say this also looks at Hutchins parking, which I know they have overflow parking, so that would be something you'd have to work through just to identify, but just wanted to bring this up so that way y'all could also look at it and understand what this could be. So with that, if y'all have any questions, obviously the whole team is here. We're willing to take any and then walk through anything else that y'all would like to talk about too.
Are we ready to send it to council?
You
Okay.
answered all
Nope,
my
I'm good.
questions.
Okay,
I like it.
if everybody's ready, do I have a motion?
No, we can motion to send it to council.
Seconded.
Consider approval of the small area plan. First and a second, all in favor? Motion passes.
Those
Nice.
not in favor?
Just to make sure that was unanimous, right?
I didn't see any hands raised from Greg or Alan.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I was doing that. Yeah, I didn't go high enough.
Thank you.
That was the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you all so much for the opportunity. Thank you, sorry.
I was going to say there's more. Now that it's sent to council, now we really want to tell you what's. Right.
Okay. Item number 3 is executive session. Pursuant to the following designated sections of the Texas Government Code, annotated Chapter 551, Texas Open Meetings Act, the Economic Development Corporation will recess into executive session to discuss the following. A, Section 551.07, deliberation regarding economic development negotiations. 1, discuss Thrive Business grant applications. We adjourn into executive session at 6:45.
Roanoke yesterday?
Yeah, yeah.
That was his first project to annex land. He was like, it's the most painstaking process.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't realize, I've never annexed land before.
It is 7:41. EDC is reconvening into general session. Consider approval of submitted grant applications for the approved amounts under the Thrive Business Grant. Is there a motion?
I make the motion to approve Jolly Orthodontics in the amount of $5,775.04
And authorize.
and authorize the town manager to negotiate and the economic development president and town manager to execute performance agreements with each applicant and recommend approval of same to the town council.
Is there a second? Is- All in favor? Unanimous. Motion passes. Also,
The additional applicants have been asked for additional clarification of their applications.
7:42, we adjourn.